News.
All right, thank you so much for that, Connor. And let's get more into what we're learning as President Biden's decision to go back on his word and issue a categorical pardon for his son Hunter just weeks before his scheduled sentencing on gun and tax convictions. I want to put up a live picture right now there in Washington, D.C. of the White House. Of course, President Biden is not there, but this was a surprise, but it wasn't all surprising to some. The sweeping pardon covers not only Hunter Biden's convictions in 2 cases in Delaware and California, but also any other, quote, offenses against the United States which he committed or may have committed or taken part in during the period of January 1, 2014 through December 1, 2024. Biden is hardly the first president, though, to deploy the pardon powers to benefit those close to him, but it was still a surprising reversal for a man who pledged to reverse norms and respect the rule of law. All right, let's get into this more. We want to bring in right now former federal prosecutor Neama Rahmani. Neama, thank you so much for joining us. And we've talked to you a time or two about this case about Hunter Biden, and we've asked you about the potential pardon from Biden. You said it would not happen. What's your reaction, and what do federal prosecutors think when a president goes back and pardons someone in this way?
Andy, I thought it would happen. And the reason I thought it would happen is Hunter Biden's own actions. And we'll start in Delaware, where he was offered a diversion deal. That's unheard of in federal court. I put more than 1,000 people in federal prison. I never once offered diversion. And Republicans in Congress rightfully criticized the deal as a sweetheart deal. But what did Hunter Biden and his lawyer Abby Lowell do? They walked away from that deal. They turned down that gift. So that's not something that you do unless you have a pardon lined up. Let's move to the California tax case. And in that case, on the day of trial, when the jury had walked in, Hunter Biden pleaded guilty to all the counts in the indictment without a plea deal. Again, that's not something that you do. He was represented by Mark Garagos, very experienced lawyer in that case. You always negotiate a deal. You get some of the charges dropped, you negotiate a reduction in the sentence. So the fact that Hunter Biden did those 2 things, which were not what a rational actor would do when he himself is a lawyer, his father is a lawyer, led me to believe that he had a pardon lined up. So this isn't something that Joe Biden decided over Thanksgiving dinner. This was planned months ago, Andy.
Yeah, and as you say, and TMZ also reporting that when he entered his plea deal, he knew that his father, the president, would pardon him. And of course, we've also heard from the White House, Karine Jean-Pierre, on the way to Africa, saying that Biden made this decision over the weekend. Can we get back into the timeline a little bit and how long this decision led up? Because you kind of indicated that. What else can you tell us about this?
Well, again, this is something that we know that President Joe Biden lied to us, and it's a question of, did he change his mind this past weekend while he was carving the turkey? Or was this something that was in the books for months and that they just held close to the vest because of an election? And first, obviously, it was Joe Biden who was running for president, and then Kamala Harris. And we know politicians can lie and change their stance. And I think that's exactly what happened. Joe Biden loves his son. He has every right to pardon him. The presidential pardon power is absolute. So I'm not faulting him for doing so. I'm just faulting him for lying to the American people time and time again, both directly and through his press secretary. And, I would say that, Democrats have been critical of Donald Trump and his lack of candor in some instances, and him thinking that potentially he's above the law. But really, Joe Biden himself, and trying to excuse his conduct, attacked the Department of Justice and said this was a vindictive political prosecution when those arguments were rejected by both federal judges that considered them. So really, I think the Democrats here lost the moral high ground despite arguing for years that the pardon power was used improperly by Donald Trump. Of course, pardoning his son-in-law's father and other individuals that he pardoned, and potentially is going to pardon some or all of the Capitol rioters. So I think there's going to be less outrage when that happens.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, the statement there from President Joe Biden, similar to maybe what you have heard in the past from Trump in talking about how he has been prosecuted in that way. And I do want to ask you, because we heard about this and it felt like an all-encompassing. You mentioned he talked about the fact that it was 2014 all the way up there until 2024, all encompassing. What do you make of that? And is that a way to potentially limit Trump in his second term to go back and investigate more about Hunter?
It is, Andy. And obviously, we have the two open cases. We have the Delaware gun case, we have the California tax case. But of course, there's also potential criminal liability because of Hunter Biden's business dealings with Ukraine and China. That would be a FARA, Foreign Agent Registration Act violation. That wasn't charged. Obviously, we've all seen the pictures on the laptop showing significant drug use, crack cocaine use, all the discussion of prostitutes and escorts. That could also be charged. So any federal crime within this 10-year period is pardoned. And this is the most sweeping pardon I've seen in my lifetime, probably going back all the way to former President Richard Nixon. This is not something that you typically see, but I guess President Biden said, well, if I'm going to issue it, I'm just going to issue it. Blanket pardon. Go all in on this.
Yeah, and let's talk about some of the maybe other side of this, because you mentioned pardons have happened before. Major pardons about family entanglements, family ties have happened before with Clinton and also with Trump, as he pardoned the father of his son-in-law, Kushner there. What do you make of that in terms of the history of these pardons and what this precedent sets?
Well, there have been some familial pardons. Obviously, we talked about Trump. We talked about Bill Clinton pardoning his half brother for drug charges. But I don't think we've seen the sweeping pardon like this. I mean, you have two cases active, pending sentencing in two different coasts, significant number of felony convictions. You have some potentially questionable business dealings with foreign countries. You have admitted drug use, admitted prostitution, writing off some of those expenses on one's taxes when he didn't even initially pay taxes. So, really, it's a very broad pardon in terms of the type of conduct that we're excusing. And obviously, this is within the president's discretion. But when you've insisted month after month that no one is above the law and you trust our system, why did you waste the court's time, the jurors' time, all the lawyers who've been working on this case for so many months when this was the plan all along? If I'm one of the jurors in the Delaware case, I'd be pretty frustrated right now, having to sit through weeks of testimony. It made for great TV here on LiveNOW. We were covering the case every day, but it was all for naught and a complete waste of time.
Yeah, and if they knew that this pardon was coming way back when, you can imagine what those people are thinking. But he has those presidential powers to pardon him. My last question, and as you predicted that this would happen, but I can see that you're frustrated in the fact that it did happen, and federal prosecutors have such a high success rate of conviction. How do federal prosecutors look at pardons as a whole? Because you do all this work, you put in all of this, and you let the jury decide or the judge decide in some cases, and then the president comes in and does a sweeping pardon. Does that frustrate federal prosecutors?
It does, Andy. And if you're a prosecutor, you're taught to make decisions not for political reasons. And you see someone who is pardoned simply because his father was president. And let's be honest, oftentimes pardons are given out as political favors or someone that is well connected to a president or a governor. So if I'm David Weiss and I've spent years investigating this case, both under the Trump administration when he was appointed U.S. Attorney of Delaware, and then under the Biden administration where he was kept on as U.S. Attorney and appointed special counsel by Attorney General Merrick Garland, I think to myself, well, what was the point of all this? Spending years of my life and millions of dollars in the special counsel's office investigating these cases. And this isn't a case of Jack Smith that stopped because Donald Trump was elected president. That investigation stopped for a different reason. This stopped because of a pardon, and it could have been stopped 4 years ago. So really kind of questionable timing on the part of President Biden. And we know why he did it, because he didn't want the political fallout while he was campaigning for president and Kamala Harris was campaigning for president. And that's why I tried to sneak this bad news in, at least for the Democrats, late Sunday evening when it's probably one of the slowest times in the news cycle.
No, that is so very true. Interesting timing, to say the least, both the fact that they waited this long, but also they could have waited even longer to let almost Trump be in office and sign it on the way going out. So very interesting. Neama, thank you so much for breaking it all down. I appreciate your time as we dissected all of these cases in full and now leading up to this pardon. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me, Andy.
All right, thanks so much. All right, let's continue.